This is Learning Coherence, Chapter 3, a series on the architecture underneath professional learning plans. This chapter, why naming the type of change you're after determines everything that follows. Chapter 3, goals that name the type of change. Once the impact vision is clear, something happens to the way you write goals. They get more precise, and that precision matters more than most planning teams realize. Here's what I mean. A typical professional learning goal sounds like this: we will build teacher capacity in formative assessment. That sounds reasonable. It might even get approved without much pushback. But what does it actually mean? What kind of change are you after? Understanding formative assessment, valuing it, being able to design formative tasks, actually using them consistently in classrooms week after week. Those are different kinds of change. And each one requires different support, different timelines, and different evidence. Killion's KASAB framework makes this explicit. Knowledge. Do educators understand something new? Attitudes. Has something shifted in how they see their work, their students, their own capacity? Skills. Can they do something they couldn't do before? Aspirations. Do they want to? Is there motivation, desire, internal drive to engage? And behaviors. Are they actually doing it? Consistently over time, in their practice. Each of these is a legitimate target, but they operate on different timescales, and they require fundamentally different evidence. A knowledge goal can be assessed in a session. An attitude shift might surface in reflective writing or interviews over weeks. A skill can be demonstrated in a coaching cycle or a peer observation. But a behavior goal that takes months. You're looking for sustained, observable change in what someone does in their classroom, not what they say they do, what they actually do. That's not a survey. That's longitudinal observation, coaching documentation, maybe peer feedback structures built over time. Now, I should name a design choice here, because if you know Killion's work, you'll notice I'm doing something specific with KASAB. Killion primarily applies KASAB to outcomes, describing the types of change that professional learning produces, and she uses near-term, mid-term, and long-term outcome language. What she describes as a near-term outcome often functions in practice like what most planning teams would call a goal. She moves between these framings herself, and there are good reasons for that flexibility. In Learning Coherence, I apply KASAB at the goal level, and here's why. Goals and outcomes do different structural work in the plan. A goal is a commitment made before implementation. It says this is the change we're designing toward, and here's what kind of change it is. When KASAB lives at the goal level, it forces that specificity up front. Before you've designed a single activity, before you've built the logic model, you've already named, are we after knowledge, behavior, a shift in aspiration? That decision shapes everything downstream. When KASAB only lives at the outcome level, the goal can stay vague. Build capacity in formative assessment, and the specificity only emerges later when someone asks what the near-term outcome looks like. By then, the plan is already structured around an ambiguous commitment. The logic model is built, the activities are designed, and if it turns out the team meant behavior change, but the activities only support knowledge building, that mismatch is baked in. When KASAB lives at the goal level, the ambiguity surfaces immediately. What kind of capacity, understanding, skill, consistent practice? The team has to answer that before they move forward, and that answer disciplines the entire plan. This is a deliberate design choice. It draws on Killion, but extends her framing. Other approaches handle it differently, and they have good reasons. This is where I landed after years of watching plans with vague goals produce logic models that couldn't be evaluated because nobody had ever specified what kind of change they were actually after. So here's what it looks like in the system. When a goal is generated, the KASAB dimension is specified. Educators will deepen their understanding of formative assessment practices that's tagged as knowledge. Educators will consistently integrate formative assessment into weekly instruction that's tagged as behavior. The system doesn't let you blur the line because the line determines everything that comes after it. The theory of action changes, the evidence plan changes, the impact metrics change, the timeline changes. A knowledge goal with an impact metric that expects classroom observation is a mismatch. You're measuring practice change for an understanding target. A behavior goal, measured only by a post-session survey, is a mismatch in the other direction. You're measuring satisfaction when the goal requires observation and practice over time. The system makes these mismatches visible, not as errors. As design questions, do you actually mean this as a behavior goal? Then here's what your evidence plan needs to look like. Or do you mean it as a knowledge goal? Then a well-designed assessment after the learning experience might be sufficient. Here's why I think this matters beyond planning precision. When a team works through this distinction, when they sit with a generated goal and ask, wait, are we actually trying to change behavior here, or are we trying to build understanding first? That conversation builds capacity. It teaches something about the nature of professional growth that transfers to every future plan they write, with or without the tool. How long does behavior change take? What kind of support does it require? What evidence would actually tell us it's happening? The plan isn't just the product of the thinking, the plan is the professional learning. And that brings us to the piece that most plans skip entirely, and the single most important idea in this series, the because.